To the pulpit. It's time again now for our men to share to the congregation what God has revealed to them in the parsha. The first reading is from the book of Exodus, chapter 1, 18 to 22. Will be shared to us by Brother Richard.
Shabbat Shalom. The Parsha, which I'm going to do the Midrash for today, is in Exodus chapter 1, verse 15 to 21. Now, this is the story about the king of Egypt, the Pharaoh, who wants the midwives to kill the males, which is one of the attempts of Satan to annihilate the men of Israel so that he will preempt the coming of the Messiah. Now he commanded the midwives to kill every male Jew or Hebrew. But in verse 17, the midwives feared God and did not do as the king of Egypt has commanded them, but let the boys live. Now because of that, in verse 20, so God was good to the midwives, and the people multiplied and became very mighty. And it came about, in verse 21, because the midwives feared God, that he established households for them. So this is the result. The verse 20 and verse 21 was the result of the faithfulness of the Hebrew midwives not to follow the king's command. Inasmuch as we were commanded by the Bible to obey the authorities, to obey those who are ruling over us, but that obedience stops when our obedience to God begins. So in this small midrash, I hope and pray that we can reflect to these words that if we fear God and keep His commandments, He will bless us. Amen. Amen.
A minute and 30. Very good. The next passage also is from the same book, but chapter 3, verse 1 to 6. This is the passage assigned to me. Let me read it first. Now Moses was pasturing the flock of Jethro and his father-in-law, the priest of Midian. And he led them the flock to the west side of the wilderness and came to Horeb, the mountain of God. The angel of the Lord appeared to him in a blazing fire from the midst of bush. And he looked, and behold, the bush was burning with fire. Yet the bush was not consumed. So Moses said, I must turn aside now and see this marvelous sight, why the bush is not burned up. When the Lord saw that he turned aside to look, God called to him from the midst of the bush and said, Moses, Moses. And he said, Here I am. Then he said, Do not come near me. Remove your sandals from your feet, from the place on which you are standing in holy ground. And he also said, I am the God of your father, the God of Abraham, the God of Isaac, and the God of Jacob. Then Moses hid his face, for he was afraid to look at God. Moses now entering the third part of his life. The first part being as a prince of the prince of Egypt, where he was born, not born, but he grew up with and have an Egyptian education. And the second part is being a shepherd. I'm pretty sure he enjoyed being a pastor. Very peaceful. And he doesn't have any idea that one day he will lead the Israelite out of bondage. Now this is a turning point. And if you read the verses after this, you will see that he's very reluctant to follow. You know why? Because he's coming out of his comfort zone. And he didn't have any idea that he will lead the people of Israel out of bondage. He was very reluctant, but he tried to, avoid it. And I'm pretty sure also he's not a very good public speaker. Right? And also what I notice here, when God chooses leaders, he doesn't choose the one, but according to our standard. If you are the one going to choose, I choose maybe, very good in English, very good public speaker, but look how God chooses leaders. And before I share this verse today, I checked last night some sermons about this verse, and none of them seems have none of them is like making sense to me. Until this morning, then all of a sudden I realized this is what God has revealed to me, that when God called us from our comfort zone, even though if we think that we are not qualified to do it, then we have to follow it. And we have to obey. Amen. And we have to do it. All you have to do is we trust God. Amen. Amen. The next passage is from also the same book, but different verses. Verses 7 to 21 to chapter 4, verses 1 to 2, by Brother Jaime Noriega.
Amen. Do I translate it in Filipino? No. Next time. Amen. So from Exodus 3, verse 7 to chapter 4, verse 2. Here, God hears the cry of his people. And because of this, God spoke to Moses. But here, when God spoke to Moses, he also allows him the liberty of speech, which Moses had exercised. Moses objects his own insufficiency for the service he was called to. He asks God, "Who am I?" He thinks himself to be unworthy of the honor and not equal to the task. He thinks he wants courage and therefore cannot go to Pharaoh to make a demand which might cost his head. He thinks he wants skill and therefore cannot bring forth the children of Israel out of Egypt because they are unarmed, they are undisciplined, quite dispirited, utterly unable to help themselves. Therefore, it is morally impossible to bring them out. But God answers this objection. He promises him his presence, saying, "Certainly, I will be with thee." And that is enough. Those that are weak in themselves may yet do wonders, being strong in the Lord and in the power of his might. And those that are most different of themselves may be most confident in God. God's presence puts an honor upon the worthless, wisdom and strength into the weak and foolish, makes the greatest difficulties dwindle to nothing, and is enough to answer all objections. But Moses did not stop there. He begs instructions for executing the commission that God has given him. He desires to know by what name God would at this time make himself known, a name which will carry authority for him. He assumes that the children of Israel would ask him, "What is his name?" If he really was sent by God, does he know the name of God? He desires instructions and what answers to give them, and asking again, "What shall I say to them? What name shall I vouch to them for the proof of my authority? I must have something great and extraordinary to say to them. What must it be? If I must go, let me have full instructions, that I may not run in vain. But God then readily gives him full instructions. First, he says, I am that I am. This explains his name and signifies that he is the one true God. Next, he is further directed to make use of the name of God, which is more familiar and intelligible to his people. God told him to say, the name of God, for now I'll say Yahweh, the God of your fathers hath sent me unto you. Thus God had made himself known to him, and thus he must make him known to them, that he might revive among them the name known to their fathers, which is to be feared, was much decayed and revived and almost lost. This was necessary to prepare them for deliverance, that he might raise their expectations of the speedy performance of the promises made unto their fathers. Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob are particularly named because with Abraham the covenant was first made. With Isaac and Jacob, often expressly renewed, and these three were distinguished from their brethren and chosen to be trustees of the covenant. God will have this to be his name forever, and it has been, is, and will be his name by which his worshippers know him and distinguish him from all false gods. The thing is, whoever God calls, as what Brother Eric says, to fulfill a specific task, he equips, not only with skills, but with instructions and with his name, which he also passed over to his son, Yeshua, which also carries the name of the Father. Amen.
Amen. The last, but not the least, will share to us Exodus chapter 5, verses 9 to 23 to chapter 6, verse 1. Brother Mitch.
Let's try to make things without straw. Wow, that's a heavy burden. Pharaoh accuses Moses and Aaron of distracting the Israelites from their work, that of making bricks for Egyptian construction projects. For more detail of brick making, but typically when bricks were made, the Egyptians would supply the Israelites laborers with straw to mix with clay in order to mold the bricks. Instead, the Israelites would now be expected to gather their own straw to make the bricks, and the number of bricks they would have to make would not decrease but stay the same. The Israelis failed to make the required number of bricks, and the Israel foremen are beaten. This illusion with the impossible task they have been given, the foreman go to Pharaoh to complain about their plight. Pharaoh, showing no mercy, responds, lazy. That's what you are, lazy. That is why you keep saying, let us go and sacrifice to the Lord. Now get to work. You will not be given any straw. You must produce your full quota of bricks. The foreman now realized that Pharaoh is punishing them because of Moses and Aaron. So in verse 20-21, they confront the two men and ask that God judge them for inciting Pharaoh. What a turn of events. A short time earlier, the leaders of Israel were receiving Moses and Aaron with joy, and now they are cursing them. the fickleness of Israel towards God's prophets would be a central theme of the Bible all the way up through the deaths of Jesus and his apostles. Moses then questions God, saying, "O Lord, why have you brought trouble upon the people?" God, however, in chapter 6, verse 1, it reassures Moses. He explains that, "Now you will see what I will do to Pharaoh. Because of my mighty hand, he will let them go. Because of my mighty hand, he will drive them out of his country." The focus again is put back on God. Moses and Aaron can do nothing for Israel on their own. Only God, acting on behalf of Israel, can effect their release from bondage. Pharaoh has thrown down the gauntlet, so to speak. He has refused to even allow the Israelites to worship God for a measly 3 days. Amen.